sequencing them out we'll be sequencing additional inquiry team meetings after the June DST meeting, and continuing to open those learning spaces to dive into these different topics. So that's the idea here, is to just create an open space for dialogue. We don't have to have formality, in terms of presentation or conclusion. We'll meet as many times as we need to kind of satisfy the interests of the members of the DST. So this is probably just a first meeting, is my guess, and we can continue to have others. So we will strive to make the data and the information as digestible as possible without overly interpreting it, making sure that folks can look right down at the source documents and make sure they can see those. And then we'll just get a chance to ask questions, and we'll try to bring in folks that can help answer questions when we have a sense of that. So, and if it's not in the same meeting, we'll bring them to the next meeting. Meetings are being recorded, as you probably just heard, and so they can be shared. The other thing that we've tried to do is the same as the DST has the DST members participating and then does have the opportunity for observers. We've kind of tried to set this meeting up, and appreciate your patience as we pivoted from a meeting to a webinar to allow for that. We kind of initially maybe thought this could be like more of a work session, but in the spirit of transparency, we just thought, what the heck, let's make sure that we can get as many people in the room as want to be here. So, so recordings can be shared out afterwards as well. What I want to do, transition to here in just a moment, is to check in on our DST working agreements, which will apply here as well. And then we can talk a little bit about the deeper purposes of this specific meeting, and then make sure we introduce folks who are not DST members, who are resources to us, who are here. So again, I want to start by just, Kale had said that you would be able to share our working agreements. And so here they are, and this is very much a place where we're looking for that dialogue. And so we'll be listening with curiosity and listening to differing opinions. So we may see differences of opinion across different ways that people read these technical documents. That's the reality of anything that's kind of this complex and nuanced. And recognizing that people bring different lived experience, and being open to persuasion. We're going to this exercise is very much about grounding our decisions in facts as much as we can, even with that understanding that there's some interpretive differences, and breaking our complex issues into digestible pieces. We're going to continue to, have that trust and team culture. And as we've been talking about, we're as open as we can be here for this accountable process. So thanks for allowing just a moment to reground ourselves in those, as we get into some topics that certainly have had some dialogue in the community and are really important. So our meeting purpose today, so acknowledging our context for this, it was raised in the DST that there are some reports that have come out, and some of them including geotechnical reports. So it was called the soils report. So if you are remembering it that way, its formal name is geotechnical supplemental investigation, I believe. And some questions about what that contains, and some questions about whether, what that means for the efficacy or the purpose of the DST, and what we're spending our time on. So we've also included some other data that is relevant to the buildable conditions on the site, natural constraints, and so forth. And so our focus today is really not on past behaviors or present behaviors, but really on the content. So we're going to try to stick mostly into these documents and what we understand about them. Again, allowing for differing views and voices about what this data means. I guess I'll pause there and say, all of that forward. If there's any concerns or questions, particularly about those, feel free to raise a hand or put something in the chat. Otherwise, we can probably move away from these working agreements. And I do believe there's a few people here. Kale, yeah, thank you. I'm looking at our numbers, we have a nice robust attendance here of 33 people. If we all unmute and just introduce ourselves, standard practices, that's going to take us almost 20 seconds a piece. We're going to be eating up 10 minutes. So I'd rather not do that because we are all named on our screens. But I do want to make sure that the folks that are in the room as resources that we invited in particular, which is authors of a couple of the key reports, have a chance to just introduce themselves and what their background is. So if Ryan is in the room, I'd love to start by asking Ryan to introduce himself.
I am here. Hi, Erica.
Hey, Ryan.
My name is Ryan Spoustat. I am with Landmark Consultants. We're a civil engineering and surveying firm based here in Steamboat. We do work all over Northwest Colorado, but the majority of our work is in Routt County. We worked on a number of large projects in Steamboat. Anything. I was just at the ground or the ribbon cutting for the new City Hall fire station. We worked on Wild Blue for the ski area, Sleeping Giant for the school district. We worked with Steamboat 700 and then Steamboat West Neighborhoods, who had annexation applications prior to the housing authorities. And then we helped the housing authority with Brown Ranch. We've also worked with the housing authority on a number of their other projects. And so my role as a civil engineer is, usually I design everything outside the building. So think of roads, utilities. And so I'm just here to kind of help further along the conversation about Brown Ranch. What we typically do is take recommendations provided by a geotechnical engineer and in a geotechnical report, which is what Erica referenced earlier. And that might be a good segue to Brian Lynn to introduce himself.
Thank you. Perfect.
Hi, this is Brian Lynn. I'm with NWCC. I started NWCC 33 years ago in Steamboat, and we do mainly geotechnical engineering, environmental consulting, and construction observation, materials testing, and special inspections. So we've been here for 33 years, and we have done the geotechnical investigation for this project as well as all the other subdivisions surrounding this property. So we've got quite a bit of experience in this part of town, all parts of town, but specifically West Steamboat.
Fantastic. So as they are authors of some of the reports in question, these are the first two sort of resource folks that we've brought to the room, if you will, the virtual room. And that's not to preclude other voices and folks from joining us in other meetings, but I think with the amount we have to get through and those two folks, we will have plenty to fill up the remainder of our hour. So the document that was sent out and that we will kind of be using today, Kale, I think you were going to maybe show this one again also for me, share screen, and we've got a summary of some of the key data. It may not be everything. This is a living document, so we can add to this list. Everyone should be able to, if they want to, click right straight into the document, which has been shared in the chat as well. We probably won't spend a lot of time looking at this very wordy item here because that's not a fantastic visual. I think we'd rather see each other's faces in dialogue style, but just to mention some of what is in there for folks that might be kind of orienting themselves. I imagine some people got a chance to really dig into this and others did not. So we started out with just some of the site features and buildability analysis that was presented back in 2022 from YVHA of what some of the constraints are. It shows things like wildlife habitat and buffers and parcel setbacks. Then we have the report that has been much talked about, and so a direct link right into that supplemental geotechnical investigation of Brown Ranch neighborhoods by NWCC. And so this is the one that talks about some of the geotechnical conditions that were identified. And I will say I am the author of these summaries on this page. I've done my very best to just kind of try to give people a heads up about what's in there without putting any interpretation to it. If you see other facts that are more interesting to you in those documents than the ones that I picked out, I was striving for some brevity. Please feel free to bring those other issues and bullet points up. I made a good faith effort, and I very much invite you to join me in finding what else you find is important in those documents. And then I will mention that some of the other items we have in there are sort of a memo on soils report and infrastructure costs that was sent just very recently last week to from the YBHA board to City Council in response to that issue being brought to council. We also have a few more things here that are, just sort of a general mapping of expansive soils in Colorado and how they're dealt with from a third-party, consultant, and some information about Slate Creek and that drainage and the existing conditions out there with that, which does also create some natural constraints and opportunities on the site. And then there's a link to the master drainage study. And then a little bit of information about sort of the zoning approval process, and that helps show that there's a couple of stages to that. So that's what's here so far. We can add more information. I understand that, with all of you and this many folks in the room, some people will have really dug into this. Some people are just kind of getting their feet under them with it. So that's fair. Particularly with, trying to put this together quickly and responsively with the issue that was raised and get it back out to you, and the timing that was left for you to look at it. But hopefully that's something we can continue to build on, is just making sure that folks have a chance to look at that information before inquiry teams, and then we can have the best and most robust discussions. So we can probably stop sharing that screen, although at any point, if somebody wants to get back to that particular document, again, it's in the chat, but if that's not working for you, we can put it back up. It's just, I think we'd rather probably see each other's faces than look at that kind of dense text. So that's what we have there. Now, most of our time is really to be spent in group discussion. So some questions that, I'd maybe start us out with. And if these aren't the questions you want to ask or answer, that's fine, but just kind of what stood out for folks when you read through some of these materials. What did you learn that you didn't maybe know before? And then what questions outstanding questions do you have, having looked at what are some, pretty technical documents? I know, getting through that is a lot. So what stood out, what you learned, and what questions you have that we should continue to dig into as a team. And if folks want to use the raise hands feature, that might be great. Although, I don't want to stand on formality over much. I want this to be a nice dialogue space, but I also want to make sure that we get to a variety of voices. So does anybody, Richard, I see you're using a just regular hand, and that works well, and people can use the electronic hand as well. So the first Richard I saw was actually Richard Mandel, and then we'll go to Richard P. I'm just going to go with Richard P. Sorry.
Ryan, my first question, Ryan, did the site plan for Brown Ranch develop from the information you had years ago from Steamboat 700? And was the soils, and Brian, was the soils test done after the site plan was done? And I know Ryan, you took into account the topography, but is this the best place to put the buildings or the neighborhoods?
So the soils report, we had the soils report from Steamboat 700 and supplemental from West Neighborhoods, which identified some issues, namely the expansive soils and then the presence of shale. And so we based what's in I call it the Methuen plan, but the Brown Ranch Community Plan was based on that information. But one of the challenges, right, with subsurface information is it's below grade. You can't just go out there and know what's happening below grade. So knowing that these things were there, we definitely highlighted the need that additional soils information was needed. And that's what the supplemental investigation has, that information, the additional bore pits that we worked with. At that time, the Michaels organization was a development partner with the Housing Authority. So it's not just me who looks at the soils reports. There's also structural engineers, architects, contractors, the Michaels organization who was acting as a developer, and came up with all those different test pit locations. And that's what NWCC performed, the additional information. So in my mind, really the additional information that NWCC developed was to take Brown Ranch to the next step after annexation, if that makes sense.
Thanks. Brian Len, did you have anything to add there? Because I think the question was directed to both of you.
No, not really. We did 40 test pits for the supplemental investigation, and we tried to put those test pits like in the deepest cut areas for the project for the roads, because that was what we were really concerned about, what was the depth of shale. So I guess the first question was, did we do the soils test before or after the plan? I think it was sort of a working plan. And then we went out and did the test pits. And our logs pretty much show at that time what the proposed pavement grade was going to be versus where our test holes were, test pits. And we did get refusal with a fairly large size hoe, track hoe. We tried to get the biggest hoe we could get so we could determine the excavatability of the shale. So
Was there any thought of moving, this goes back to Ryan, moving things around to make the grading a little bit easier? Were there other places to put the housing units that would be more efficient in cuts and fills?
Yeah, I mean, I think the plan certainly would be refined. So if you think of Brown Ranch as a marathon, to me at annexation, we were probably at mile 2. We had a long way to go, and the project has a long way to go. You're talking about a project at that time that was talking about building out to 2025. I mean, to 2050, a 25-year build out potentially. So yeah, there would definitely be refinements to the plans based on the information that NWCC provided.
And Brian, one more quick question. You did this in October, November, which is a low water table time of year. Is there any thoughts of doing it at a higher water table time of year?
If we were going more for a site specific for buildings, definitely. Spring, April, May, our runoff season is when it's the worst. We've got the shale bedrock, which is shallow. We've got weathered bedrock on top of it, which is very blocky and transmits water. But a lot of times you'll see those in the spring coming out of the hillside, and by July they're gone. So yes, ideally, to determine water, you want to do it when the runoff is the highest. We did for the underpass over here at this project, we drilled test holes and we put groundwater monitoring wells in for that project. We had 4 wells in, so we could monitor. Again, I believe that one was done in the winter. And then we put monitoring wells in and we monitored the water levels for 2 years. So at that time, the city did not want that underpass under 40 to be in the water table. So that was the main reason for that.
So Richard, I'm gonna ask that maybe we let some other people, and if you've got more, you'll come back around. Cool. And Was there anybody else who's here sort of in a resource capacity or any other comments that Brian or Ryan wanted to add to that particular thing? Or if not, I'll go to Richard, and then the next hand I saw come up was Kelly. All right, Richard, why don't we go ahead and let you go.
And Erica, I appreciate you attempting. It's Richard Passavant. So very, very easy.
It's not that hard, is it? My maiden name was
No, it's
horrible,
not.
so
Yeah.
sorry about that. But I got to know you. I just didn't quiz you on your pronunciation, did I?
No problem.
Go ahead though.
So I've been driving a couple of days, and I have not had a chance to review the data. So I'm going to ask an engineer to do something that they hate to do, which is summarize the summary and give us can you give us all a 5-minute grounding? Because I feel like some folks here have been neck deep in this since before the last vote, and they're going to ask extremely specific questions when I don't have a grounding on what the report said, what was the finding, what was the scenario, just so we can come into this all kind of at the same level. So I don't know if that's Ryan or Brian, one of your engineers. If you could summarize, that'd be great.
Well, I can start, Ryan, if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
We concluded our conclusions in the report we just put out letter. And basically the subsoil, shale, bedrock, clay conditions are no different than what we've hit in the 4 to 5 surrounding subdivisions. In the development of those subdivisions, they had to blast shale to get the roads in. Some of them they had to blast to get the utilities in. And then, half of them are on drill piers, some are on spread footings as far as foundations go. It's highly variable in that area, but basically it's a very similar condition geotechnically than the other subdivisions. The only one we did not work on was Steamboat 2. Of course, it's so old, but we're still doing soils tests there every now and then. But the key one is the one directly west. It's the name of Silver Spur subdivision. They had quite a bit of blasting on that one. Utilities and roadways. Heritage Park, they had blasting. Overlook, they're going now, putting in foundations. They're doing helical piles. That went in, not as much blasting. I don't know if they had any actually. So in summary, we're very similar to the other subdivisions.
And I think noted in some of those technical opportunity, like technical solutions are noted in the soils or the geotechnical report, right? And some but as far as the question about like moving roads, that's not addressed at that point in the report, but that is one of the possible solutions that's been talked about since I think how I understand things. Does that sound about right, Brian?
Well, you're not gonna we're definitely gonna have to do almost a site-specific soils test for the individual building structures. That's why we gave preliminary foundation recommendations a range. Actually, roadways pretty much standard. We've got what the site grading, what the side slope should be, what the pavement section should be. So I'd say no, it's more the road is probably more definite. So now it's just a matter of locating it out of the shale.
All right. Richard, that sounds like you've gone off camera, so I'm assuming that initial request is probably met. Ryan, did you have I think the question was posed to both of you. Did you have something to respond as well? And then we'll go to I've got a nice lineup here of Kelly, Dawn, Chris, Christy, and Noreen.
No, I don't really have anything to add to Brian's.
So Brian,
Brian.
in the nutshell, what the site is like isn't unusual for building in Steamboat, is what I heard you say.
Definitely not West
correct?
Steamboat. No.
Definitely not. Okay.
Not
That's what I
West
want to
Steamboat.
understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Kelly.
Good afternoon, everybody. And this is either Ryan or Brian. So the soils report that you guys conducted, that was October 2023. Does that sound right?
I think that's when the field work was done.
Yep.
Right. So are those the first test holes that were done from 700 to present? It was just an overall soil study before. These are the first test pits that have been done for actually building out Brown Ranch.
I can state that we did earlier reports and we outlined it in the beginning. From the very first part of Steamboat 700, we did more of a preliminary geotechnical, geologic hazard evaluation. We drilled test holes. We did test pits. And again, for this report, we dug 40 new test pits. So, which is quite a bit. I mean, for a lot of the other subdivisions we don't do that many typically for the subdivision development.
Okay. And I'm guessing where we're at in the evolution of this whole thing, what was the timing for these test pits? I mean, to be able to say that, I don't even know if this is inside your purview, but YVHA wanted to put up 2,264 housing units. 66 of them were going to be multi-level, multi-family homes. So it's not your typical subdivision, and I guess my question is, I don't know about putting together a subdivision like this, but I'm just wondering about the timing and, is this how things usually work in your world?
We would have
Well,
liked to do the test pits earlier. We had issues. Number one, with getting a track hoe, it was very, very busy that time. We had a horrible time getting locates, utilities cleared, so I think we were off by a month or two, but it is we were hoping to get plans. We wanted to detail this investigation towards the shale bedrock, which is probably the biggest cost. So that's why we waited till they had more definite plans.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I really didn't see any plans besides the pictures that they had out there about what they were going to build and in what neighborhoods they were going to build in. And do you guys, that kind of leads into my second question.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, I'm gonna try to do the same similar, like 2 or 3. So it sounds like you're queuing up you're queuing up, and we'll come back around to you if there's not if you don't get all of it done.
No, it's just one last question.
Okay, great.
So with the blasting they were possibly talking about the helical piers, I mean, in your world, what is that usually? I mean, I've talked to a lot of the builders around here in the last couple of weeks, and I'm just wondering what you guys see as, when you go from a traditional foundation to helical piers, what does that do to cost to a multi-level, multi-family building, I guess?
Depends on who's drilling them, who's installing them. The price is highly variable on helical piles. Depends how deep they go. They charge by the foot for the steel. So it fluctuates quite a bit. But yeah, there's probably additional cost. Drill piers is another one that probably is better off in the shale because the helical piles won't penetrate the shale.
Right.
So if you're doing a conventional, more of a box structure, I had a study done in not Canyon, I think it's subdivision, where people lost their house in a landslide. And so we're going to move it up the hill and put it in piers on claystone versus doing spread footings. And it was pretty simple, 20 by 40 cabin. And the footings came out cheaper, or the piers came out cheaper than the footings. It's when you start getting these bigger custom homes that have 30, 40 corners, that's when you start adding up the piers and it gets very expensive.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Right. Any other, it seems like mostly those were directed to Brian, so unless anybody else had anybody else on the resource team wants to jump in, I'll just turn it to Don next.
Yeah,
Don, should you mention
I don't want to ask technical questions on, because, from the summaries and the material, it seems, yes, it can be fixed, built, constructed to be a supportable project, the infrastructure. But, one of the concerns the community had was density. And you start adding Heritage, Silver Spur, Steamboat 2, and the 2,260 or 2,250 residential units, you're talking about at least 10,000 people tucked away there, all residential. There's and that whole section would be workforce housing supported by YVHA, and maybe it does need to be, the density needs to be reduced, and don't take everything you can get. Maybe take some of the property and sell it off to market rate developers and let them build market rates so you get more of a mixed residential uses within and create more of a community of differences rather than everyone's in workforce housing here, but across the street you've got Silver Spur, and then you've got some of the other stuff that's further west, and there's no commercial there. People can't get a cup of coffee or a sandwich or a Coke without going into town, which even if they're willing to take the bus to run into town, there's no convenience store, there's not a gas station, there's not a breakfast place. I mean, some of the idea of having a little bit of mixed use and a small commercial facility, only talking about a few acres for development of that. And it would reduce the density, and it may be at cross purposes to what YVHA is looking for. But based on the summary that you were running on the screen and some of the quick summary provisions, whatever is going to be built there eventually can be built. It may take more time, may cost more, may have to do some engineering differences between footings and piers, etc. But it can be done. It's a question of time, money, and the ultimate density and use of the property, which will still serve a purpose and a function for the city and for the community. So I'm just throwing that out as, I guess my question was, it's probably an easier build if you reduce the density, and from a geotechnical standpoint. And I'm assuming they can isolate the more problematic areas of Olive Brown Ranch that would create greater timeframes and greater cost for putting in developable buildings. And I guess I'm asking Ryan and Brian, am I off base or is that correct? And I'll let someone else go.
Well, great. I mean, I heard some great further questions, some great possible solutions and tools and strategies. We'll be capturing those along with the direct questions to sort of in the Q&A style right now. So those things are all super valuable. Thank you for that, Don. So Brian or Ryan, if either you want to respond to that, I mean, at this point, we're taking you from your technical engineer and talking about sort of like what some of the solutions are. I think there was a great question there about like, is modifying density or modifying the specific site locations of different units and building types one of the solutions that's possible?
That certainly would, is a possibility if you wanted to minimize the area of land you're disturbing. Since I was involved in the design team and the whole previous process, I will say that, one of the conclusions that group came to was that the infrastructure costs were the variability of the infrastructures was minimized. Whether you put a single family house there or an apartment building, it sort of takes the similar infrastructure costs to provide a road, water mains, sewer mains. And so that in combination with the Housing Authority's demand report was one of the reasons that led to the density. And I will also just for the record say that there was mixed use, there was commercial included in the Methuen plan. So
yeah, Yeah. And we can get into, other elements of that plan, but I think one of the things too is how much do we return to that one versus take that note that that's something that would be of interest in a future plan, since that
Mhm.
plan is obviously going to need some amount of changes and revision. So appreciate that comment, but just to take that moment to make that note. All right, we have a lovely 6 or 7 more questions and not very much time left, which I just want to say at this moment, what that means is we'll keep adding more time, and that may mean more meetings, but let's get through the next few question Q&As, and I might, just continue to ask folks and I probably should have been more strict about this at the beginning, to ask just 1 or 2 things, and then allow another question to happen. So Chris, you were next up.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll have a combo question. You referenced the adjacent neighborhoods, with the exception of the school, those are mostly single family homes. So my question is do these factors become more consequential and more expensive if you're building buildings at scale that are presumably bigger, heavier, and take up more footprint in the expansive soils? And sort of abutting to that was the YBHA memo said, essentially, hey, the cost risk of this is being overstated and overblown. I sort of see those two as running together. I don't know if you can address those in tandem or separately, but I guess that's what I'd be curious about. If if they stick with at least some of those big buildings they originally proposed, a bigger deal in these soils and in this shale than it would be building those single family neighborhoods next door.
Well, this is Brian. I can answer that. The scale, which the previous question was, if we do more bigger single family homes, we'll reduce it. Actually, it's the opposite. The more you can do, like say we come in and do 5 or 6 lots at one time, and you have one pier drilling contractor, they can come in and you save mobilization. And again, if it's a simpler layout structure, it's typically less piers. Piers carry a very high load. So if it being a 1-bedroom versus a 3-bedroom versus 4-bedroom, drill piers can carry those.
Thank you. Great.
And I would just add, I think maybe Chris's question was more geared towards large multifamily buildings. With large multifamily buildings, you do have more options in your design, in your toolkit, I guess, to address the expansive soils that are out there. And so I think they're less impactful with larger buildings.
I agree. But post-tension slabs is one that's going on in Hayden right now. Last 2 of the, not 2, but the very first Yampa Valley Housing, the reserves,
Yeah, the
that was
reserves.
on post-tension slab, on expansive soils, on existing fill materials that had to be taken out and put back in. So yeah, I agree with Ryan. A 4-story apartment building has probably got more options than a single family home.
Great. Thank you both. So lots of options, lots of possibilities, and but it, lots of also kind of, it depends. And so Christy Belton, what is your question at the moment?
Hi, thank you. So probably more for Brian. Can you guys hear me okay? I've been on mute.
Yes.
Okay. So Brian discussed the similarity to the immediate neighborhoods. And my question is, are there other areas of, around Steamboat, maybe south or north, or there are other areas that have lower, generally speaking, lower costs to the, the geotechnical information? And to simplify it, is there like a general rule of thumb that you can say, okay, so generally, I'm just making this up, generally South Valley is 50% less for those kind of costs than this particular area? I don't know if that makes sense, Brian. Let me know if it doesn't.
Well, be on the river. If you're on the river, you're on great sands and gravels, and your cost goes way down. Except when they look at the current one right now, we're calling it Cottonwoods. That one had 12 to 13 feet of old dump. It was a dump for the ski corps. And they had to go with a deep foundation system, not micropiles, did compaction grouting, very expensive. So, and that's south town where they got great sands and gravels, and it's definitely cheaper typically to build. But even the one we built behind Walgreens, that ended up because they had to raise the site to get out of the floodplain, and they had 3 feet of topsoil they had to take out. So that really, I mean, you can't really say south is better. I would say the river's better. Go up on the mountain, it's better, but you also got to blast granite bedrock. So you
Okay.
can't really define it.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. All right. Let's take a couple more real quick and then we'll leave a few minutes to wrap up today. And then just, if we don't get through them all, we'll assume we need to just continue the conversation. All right.
Can I just clarify too on Brian's comment about the cottonwoods? It wasn't a dump like the landfill.
Right.
It was just material that had been placed in an uncontrolled manner.
Yeah,
Like
Phil.
topsoil, not compacted.
Okay, thank you.
Boulders and stumps.
Yeah.
And mainly that's.
All right, Noreen.
My question is more about the history that both Ryan and Len has with this site. Ryan, you had worked with 700, so I'm assuming your familiarity with what is there in terms of planning is pretty thorough. And Len, with you, how long have you been involved with the soils with regards to this particular lot?
I'm sorry, was that for Brian or Ryan?
Okay, we have,
Ryan.
let me see what I've got here. I've got Ryan, and who's Brian now? Maybe I forgot a name here. The soils.
Brian's
the
last
soils
name is
guy.
Glenn, and I think that's the name you used in your question.
Yes.
Our first soils test out there was for Steamboat 700. It was in 2006. And
Okay,
we
so
called it
both,
preliminary
both of you.
subsoil and geologic hazard.
Okay, so both of you have a long history with this particular land mass, both in soils and in density, correct? Would you say that?
Yes.
Okay, so with both 700 and with Brown Ranch, I'm assuming from your professional background that you all have to really be mindful of how dense things can be with regards to the structures and being viable and not a liability for you. So I'm going to take it then that the Yampa Valley housing plan with some of the densities that they've had were okay. They were okay with you. And Ryan, am I accurate in that thought?
From an engineering standpoint, yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And Lens, how about you?
Standpoint, same thing.
Okay, thank you. That's all I needed.
All right. Quick and straightforward. Thanks, Noreen. And thanks to everybody for all the questions. So Michael Fitz.
Thanks, Erica. Is this the time where we would suggest what related tools or strategies might help? Because I see it says add ideas here.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. If you wanna voice those or put them in the chat, either one works. And given that we have a couple more questions, why don't you take a minute or two to suggest some things that you might like, and then we'll keep going.
Yeah, so I'm one of the housing authority tenants that lives in the Fish Creek Mobile Home Park, on soil that's probably way better than our houses need. But I think that absolutely needs to be a component of this development that continues to not be mentioned very much because at least anything that's on a temporary pier foundation that meets building code, because if you're dealing like one of the suggestions that's listed in there is, put bigger multifamily buildings that require bigger like more complex foundations on better soil. Well, the reverse of that should then, of course, be on the really bad areas of soil that are otherwise good places to put things. They're away from water bodies, they're not ecologically sensitive. That's where the housing authority should be considering perhaps the first new mobile home park the city would have in 30 years. That's really the only way to get affordable single family homes on a place like this, which is going to be something that at least some people want as a housing product, but it's basically never mentioned. I would be curious to hear what some of the soils experts would say about that type of a foundation, whether it be a HUD code home or whatever else might potentially be able to be surface mounted, because if soils is one of the big issues, it doesn't make sense that we're talking entirely about foundations that have to be dug into the ground versus potential innovative alternatives.
Right, and I think we've heard that like maybe the way that tool that what that bullet that is in that document already about like that larger apartment buildings on soils put them on soils that are more readily engineered to support them. I might have even written that in a way that I'm learning in this process is not quite the way peers work. So I just want to note my maybe poor phrasing as we move to also address your question, which is, aren't buildings with a less intense foundation or, isn't mobile home at one of the options for addressing putting buildings on the soils that we have? If I were to sum it up as close as, isn't that one of the options here, right?
You need to
There's
ask
a
the
very
building
large
department.
there's a very large new mobile home development that went in Granby a couple years ago that everyone should check out if they're not familiar with it, because it's, this town seems to have a very strong aversion to them. And I think part of that is just the history we have, that our newest neighborhoods for the most part are actually pre-zoning, but they made it work. They built a huge neighborhood. It's gorgeous. And it's all apparently HUD code. And that's what we should be looking at for some. It would be interesting to see, especially from a layman's perspective, for the public, a map of where these soils are and where, just like bad, okay, good, or something that's easy for the community to digest. So they understand really what's going on.
Great. So I want to give Brian and Ryan, if you want to respond to that, time to do that. And then I'll probably have to start closing our meeting. And I apologize to folks that have been kind of in the queue, because I don't want to run the meeting a lot longer than we advertise it for. I think that would maybe be a challenge and a frustration for some. But I also know that we are going to find time to continue the conversation. So Brian or Ryan, any comments about the one of the related tools or possible strategies that's been put on the table around utilizing mobile homes?
You need to ask the building department first of all, because right now, all the mobile homes we're doing, they're requiring permanent foundations. So the way of putting in a concrete pad and then putting a jack under it, I don't think is going to fly with Route County building departments. That's where I would check with that.
Right.
I'm a bit more optimistic with them.
Any comments about the engineering feasibility of that?
I think I would just say manufactured housing is definitely something that the community can consider as an option.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think, one of the things that we'll want to look towards eventually as we, as a group, kind of do these conversations and have these opportunities to learn is, what takeaways we may have for the work of the DST. And for the most part, we still have more discussion ahead of us. I would want to ask folks, we are looking forward very soon to another DST meeting where we'll talk a lot about housing needs and some of these other things. One of the questions that I think was asked very, very first about about the geotechnical report is that, does it contain such information that suggests to us that any other work of the DST really is inherently not worth spending time on? And we've heard today a lot of potential ideas and solutions that on the technical side, we've heard a lot of questions about, which ones will be best and whether we can bring in some design things. A lot of outstanding questions about how expensive will the foundations be, and a lot of understanding. I think that, we have some good information now, and there would maybe future information would also be needed to get to that level of detail. I guess one of the things I would ask of this group from this meeting is if people feel that, having started this conversation, if we can affirm that it feels like our next DST meeting is still a valuable use of y'all's time. And it seems like we are still in this conversation, but I'm just wanting to check, because that was kind of the question on the table when this was raised in the last DST, is should we continue? So can I see by a show of thumbs up, whether that's visual on the screen or using your tools, are folks still feeling like what we've heard today suggests that we should continue our journey? Seeing a lot of thumbs up on screen 1, and I'm going to go to screen 2. And I'm still seeing a lot of thumbs up there. So that doesn't mean we've concluded anything about where we'll get to. It just means that folks are still committed to the process. I suppose I should leave space. Does anybody want to show me the reverse, that they are not feeling that continuing would make sense? No, I'm not seeing that on the screens. Okay, so I think that's been, it's a very small step for us to get out of what has been a really very interesting hour for me anyway. I feel very appreciative of the questions. I feel very appreciative of the time of folks who have, to our resources, who've been able to help us interpret some of those technical documents. So I think it's a small step, but an important one, to say that so far this group is feeling that that our work can still continue, that we haven't met a barrier that says we should not. And that's actually, it's small, but it's something pretty good to know that we're feeling that way for now. So we'll continue the conversation. I apologize to folks that came into the queue a little late and we weren't able to get to your questions, but I do want to create more space for more conversation if we want and need it. We'll figure out how to schedule that out. And I just want to thank folks for raising this in such a productive and collegial way and respectful, that we could just sit together and start to explore this. I don't think we're done, but I think we've made a really nice start. So I want to thank everybody. Does anybody on my from my co-leading team here have any other things that you've seen in the chat that need a response before we wrap up for today? My co-hosts.
Erica, this might be a tough one to end on in some ways, but I do want to address it just because I know that it can affect trust in the process. There is one question about why Jim DeFrancia was not included as a panelist tonight. Would you be able to speak to that just a little bit? Because I think that we want to really share that we have a commitment to the process itself, not an outcome here. And I would hate for that to be construed as that we have a set outcome in mind.
Sure. No, that's a great question. I think it sounds like he's a speaker that we may want to bring into the process. I mean, honestly, as you saw, there's a lot of data, and we did first go to the primary authors of those reports. And so certainly we can invite Jim if that's something that we'd love to do, and if he's willing to come to a future one of these. So we could schedule that out and have Jim also talk about what he's seeing in those reports and his experience with them. Again, the initial concept here was, let's go to the actual primary authors of the reports. But we can keep going and bring in additional thoughts and opinions if that's helpful to this group.
Thanks, Erica.
Oh, I'm seeing another one in here. Can Dan's question be answered? And it might be about defined terms about mobile homes are manufactured, or is it an earlier one?
believe that is.
It
My-
was
my
the earlier
question was
one
a little
about
bit earlier.
bottom line, does the soil affect the affordability?
Exactly. Like, does the situation with the soil, in their professional opinion, make this project prohibitively expensive or otherwise not viable?
That's
I
pretty.
would say,
well,
I would say no. I mean, there's nothing in the soils that I wouldn't expect west of highway or west of 13th Street. So I guess if that's a straight answer for you, Daniel.
I would agree that with Ryan, same thing. Go to Hayden, drill piers, expansive soils, shale bedrock. So it's not just West Steamboat, it's Milner, Hayden, Craig, all the way out. We've got expansive soils, and that's what sad to say, but what it is. I just came from my kid's house in Erie, Colorado, Front Range, brand new home. They are over excavating 20 feet of clay and then bringing it back in, wetting it to over optimum, and then recompacting. This is under the roads, utilities, everything. So, and my perspective is that's got to be a lot more expensive than a drill pier foundation. Charlie MacArthur could probably answer that pretty quickly.
Great.
But
Well, in respect to the fact that there are many questions still out there on the table, folks did not quite get to. I apologize that we kind of leapfrogged that one question, but it is a nice pointed one about just sort of what does it all mean, and should we continue? So I appreciate adding that to sort of that conversation. Thinking about both this inquiry team, we can continue to dive down into this. I would take, we'll be looking through the whole chat. If you have a comment about like what more you need or we're looking for here, please put it in there and we'll make sure to try to be responsive to that. And then we will also be, as I mentioned, scheduling out the other teams as well for after June. But I look forward to seeing this group in June at the DST meeting where we will be having that conversation, the initial data information from the consultant who's working on the housing needs report. And I just want to thank all of you for your time today. Really appreciate it. All right, thanks and good night.